Well, this is going to be very strange, but always a joy, and I hope to do it many more times over the years. Today, guys, I'm not talking about Guild Wars 2. For people who only care about Guild Wars 2, you can click off the video, because today, I'm talking about the original game. There was an update. There was an actual update to Guild Wars 1 that went out just a couple of days ago. It resulted from a pretty big developer Ask Me Anything as well, and I want to talk to you guys about exactly all of that stuff. So, as you guys know, I'm a huge fan of the first game. I played it a great deal back in its heyday. Recently, I mostly only log in to produce videos and content and get snippets of the environment, or maybe do interesting streams and stuff like this. However, even for a player like me, and indeed you yourself if you're listening, if you're even vaguely thinking at some point you might turn Guild Wars 1 back on, this update is probably relevant to you, because it's a graphics related change, and it's to do with the way that the game renders some stuff. So it's a new feature. It's a command line argument, okay? So if you don't know how these work, several of my videos have discussed them, because there's a lot for Guild Wars 2. Basically, you create a shortcut to Guild Wars, and in the target, you can define various parameters. And it's a new one called -LOD full. And what this means is it improves the way that the game renders distant objects. So let's go back to the start here. Guild Wars 1 is obviously a very old game, and particularly the Prophecies area are very old areas where people's hardware was a hell of a lot weaker than it is today. So what the devs used to do is on many distant objects such as trees, various forms of rocks that make up cliff faces, different props like that, when they get a certain distance away from the camera, they would swap sneakily in the distance for a fake object that was basically just a very low resolution image, like a sprite that would always be facing you, right? This is known, I think, as billboarding, and what this did was it freed up graphics cards of yesteryear to be able to focus on only rendering things that were much closer, and then as you went closer to the tree or the rock that was far away, eventually it would swap for the real thing, and it would be fully rendered. The thing is, Guild Wars 1's a big game, and not always did the devs hide that very well. So one of my favorite places to look at this is here. You can see the footage in the background, the Emberlight Camp and Endgame Prophecies area. And if you look at the rocks in the background, if you look at the giant skull heads that appeared in the Guild Wars 2 Fire Island chain as well, you'll notice that as I zoom in and out on my camera here, as I move closer and further away, they're swapping between what looks normal and nice and reasonable, compared to the rest of the game, obviously, and like this really, really ugly billboard that's there instead. It's notable in some other places as well, particularly trees and the Shiver Peaks. There'll be various examples that are going on in the background. So if you ever see I'm spinning my cursor around in a certain area, then I'm trying to highlight to you exactly where these billboards are. And it makes the game look kind of ugly. Now, always Guild Wars 1 has had a screenshot option, to take a high-res screenshot that at the moment you press the button, it removes all billboards and replaces them with the full thing. So when you look at the screenshot later, everything's all good. So the functionality is in-game to essentially remove billboards altogether, but it was only attached to the screenshotting thing. Well, the update has made it so that if you toggle on LOD full, you get that all the time, because obviously GPUs don't struggle anymore. So now if you look at the Emberlight Camp, as I move forward, none of that SWIP swapping will happen at all. And so yeah, in the background here, I guess I'll show you a little bit more of that. It looks really pronounced and profound and cool in some places, a little bit less cool in others. Especially, I would say it's notable in the Prophecy stuff, and anywhere where you get to see really far away, and particularly trees. The reason why it looks so pronounced wherever trees are involved is because the billboards of trees look terrible. Like, there's one at the Greenwich Courthouse looking out across Diessa Plateau that looks so bad, and then when you swap it, it's just like a nice regular tree back there. Maybe one of the more subtle things, but if you are about to kick up a Guild Wars 1 playthrough, definitely consider turning this on. Now, you might think it's a bit of an annoying way to enable the feature, but that's one of the reasons why this was even enabled in the first place. See, the dev that did this actually got the idea from an Ask Me Anything over on the Guild Wars 1 subreddit, where someone put forward the prospect, but because Guild Wars 1 is essentially a maintenance mode and they have no real plans or no one dedicated to working on it, they can't mess around with like UI localization and all that stuff. So just putting on as a toggle that you address directly as an argument on the shortcut, I think makes a lot of sense for them. And we might see some other stuff like that, I'm not sure. So here's the other thing, I want to read out that AMA. It's a bit old now. It had over 300 comments when I believe the guy doing it expected only 10. And so here's the backstory, really. When the Guild Wars 1 servers moved over to Amazon, there was a bit of discussion about it on the Guild Wars 1 subreddit, at which point SCW, the dev in question, made some posts. That gave him a bit of a reputation as, like, the Guild Wars 1 dev that cares still. And, yeah, someone basically requested an AMA, and the guy responded. This is the same dev that did all the awesome comments on my Azaric series, by the way, so if I wasn't already his #1 fan, it's been reinforced here. So we get a lot of cool insights about the original game. And he even did this work on this update for everyone. There was another side, by the way, just before we get into the AMA itself, to the fact an update went through, and that's that it kind of broke Toolbox, it broke text mods. People have to update those things now, which is a bit annoying, but I'm sure the talent will return and fix those things. What's even cooler, perhaps, though, is it also broke a lot of people that were botting in the original Guild Wars, and so, like, all the bots are gone, at least for now, and it's really kind of a weird experience, I guess, for people who are trying to play consistently. You might think that's a great thing. It's funny, though, because the economy is so stagnant and still at the moment that it's kind of reliant on those bots to keep pushing just, you know, raw cash into the game so that the speed clearers that are still there can easily get access to concepts and whatnot. So maybe if the bots never return and it's been fixed just because of this update and they have to work around it and it's not profitable to do so now, maybe if the bots never return, this will mean some other consequences for Guild Wars 1. I obviously don't play enough to know for sure, but that's kind of a fun side of things. So yeah, the AMA. I just want to give you guys the highlights, same as I would for any Guild Wars 2 AMA. It's not going to be everything, so the link is in the description if you want to read all the rest. There's a lot of repeating himself, though. So, for example, people keep asking him to talk about skill balance. And SCW was never responsible for skill balance and would never do it now. There's even a really brilliant comment. He says, look, that's a full-time, extremely difficult thing. I know you think you know what you're talking about with balance, but it's very, very difficult to do and is unlikely for a game in maintenance mode. So, like, there's that. A lot of people ask about pricing for Guild Wars 1 because they don't want to have to buy the trilogy and then Eye of the North on top. They want like a discount because the game's getting older now, and he says, look, I'll look into it, but, you know, I'm not really the guy for that. So there's a lot of that, which I'll just cut out of my video here. You'll just hear it once from me now. All right, so in no particular order, Renorak says, I'm sure as a company you guys prefer to be looking forward with Guild Wars 2, but with the success of other MMOs that have seen with older content, like old school RuneScape and WoW Legacy, is there any chance, or have there ever been any talks about new story content for Guild Wars 1 to bring old players back? I really like this question because as a fan of the original game, I would like to see it getting updates. Also, you have to consider Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2 are not similar games, really. They share the same universe, but gameplay-wise, Guild Wars 2 doesn't really deliver the gameplay that Guild Wars 1 delivered, and Guild Wars 1 doesn't deliver the gameplay that Guild Wars 2 delivered. So they could exist in tandem. There's a lot of people who are burnt by the fact that Guild Wars 2 doesn't continue the same sort of gameplay. Like, why not just update the old game? Also, if they can prove that they can have multiple games on the run, I think whenever they announce some big new thing that's not Guild Wars at all, or, you know, another game in this franchise, people will be more confident that Guild Wars 2 isn't going to die because everyone's just going to leave it or whatever. I think that they should be proving to us that they are a company that can handle multiple games at once, and what better way to do that than having content going into Guild Wars 1? So I'm on the community side with this, right? I've always wanted to see more GW1 stuff. It's not always that easy, though. So Steven says this, that we talk about a lot of things internally, but realistically, as I've mentioned previously in the AMA, it's hard work just to get the art tools for this game up and running. So making content changes is pretty unlikely. I'm not sure whether I'll include it directly on my video recap here, but he says basically there's two guys responsible for Guild Wars 1 maintenance. It's him and a guy called Joe Kimmis. So, that's it. And I think Joe was the guy that did the anniversary update back in, like, 2012 or whatever it was, which was the last big update to Guild Wars 1, which I covered at the time. So it's really those two, and they don't, like, have a big team, and that's, like, almost a side thing for them as well, as far as I understand. So, yeah, anyway, that's their official response to Guild Wars 1 stuff. You're not going to have any mind-blowing announcement here that Guild Wars 1 is no longer on maintenance mode. It's obviously on maintenance mode, and if that did change, you wouldn't find it buried in a subreddit AMA here like this. You'd find a big announcement on their website, wouldn't you? Anyway, so somebody asked, well, what about just a HD version? Because they seem to think that that's so much easier. Steven just says, we talk about a lot of things internally. We are a creative bunch, but we have no plans to make a HD version of Guild Wars. Moving on, Raykara says, I do hate to be that guy, but I want to ask a two-part question. And don't worry, a lot of people did that in this AMA. He says, are there any idea as to if or when the servers for this game will be shut down? And would there be a final patch to make it offline compatible? I've been interested in this as well. Obviously, I don't like thinking about the Guild Wars 1 servers going down. But there's a lot of opportunity for us as a community if that ever were to happen, in terms of us like being able to host our own servers and getting modding tools and things like that. Anyway, SDRBCW responds and says there's no plan to shut down the servers. Quite the contrary, we put a lot of effort in just making sure the game can run for a long time at a very reasonable cost. I was about to say it'd be hard to make the game offline compatible, but then I did think of a way to do it. Smiley face. That shouldn't be necessary though, because the game is so efficient to run. I mean, that's exciting to me. I don't know, guys. Maybe one day, maybe. But yes, they do talk a lot about how efficient it is to run. He talks a lot in this AMA about how efficient the original game was and how it was sort of a pleasure to look back at when they migrated the servers over. Pretty cool to think that maybe one day we might get that power in our own hands, guys. But there you have it. I'll also note, by the way, the only other dev to post in this AMA, I think, the only other one, was the current Guild Wars 2 game director, Mike Z, who had a fairly inconsequential comment, if I remember rightly. But it's just SCW really here. So, yeah, interesting thought anyway. This next question I'm throwing in, not because it's too interesting, but just because it goes against the circle jerk. So someone says, I'm designed it, I'm interested in skill theory, blah, blah, blah. But Steven says, look, this is the exact kind of detailed design information I don't actually know. This Ask Me Anything is getting some attention at work, so maybe I can talk to someone who would know into answering a question, because people who did that work are still around, ... I like that. That puts a smile on my face. It's so easy to go online and rant about how everyone who worked on Guild Wars 1 is gone when it's completely unsubstantiated. And here's Steven casually name-dropping the fact that, yeah, a lot of those guys are still around. Anyway, moving on. We've got a huge post here from Haqse. We'll go question by question. Number one, did you and or the design team expect speed clears to become such a widespread activity in the game? Were you aware of the implications when you released the tools that made them possible, like shadow form, consumable sets, etc.? And Steven says, all games have emergent behavior once they go live and people figure out interesting and fun things to do, so I would say it's not very surprising. Number two, speaking of speed clear records or in general player challenges, solo, low man, elite areas, speed clears, etc., did you imagine that what has been achieved would be possible one day? What is your favorite, most impressive / most unexpected player achievement in your game? These questions really would be good for the designers that made, you know, like the North Dungeons, or made the Underworld, or made the Fissure of Woe and so forth. But SCW says, speedruns of all games tend to be amazing and exceed the original expectation. Number three, what do you think of Guild Wars Toolbox? I'm not looking for an official stance, but I'm genuinely interested in your colleague's personal opinion. So, Toolbox is that wildly powerful tool that lets you run Guild Wars 1 in Windows full screen, lets you manipulate FOV, lets you do a lot of questionable things that the devs probably wouldn't have wanted you doing back in this game's heyday. But because it's a maintenance mode, most of the community runs it and kind of gets away with it. So, again, I doubt we can take this as an official stance. He simply says, I don't know about the tool. I'd have to look into it. Other responses in the AMA suggest he has now since learned a bit more about the tool, but I don't know sort of whether it's in Arena's best interest to clamp down on people using Toolbox at the moment. It's a weird one, definitely. I once upon a time tried to make a video on Toolbox for you guys, but it ended up seeming a little bit too much of a grey area to be able to do it. Moving on, have you considered making Guild Wars 1 free to play? He says this is actually harder than you might guess. It was a significant effort to make Guild Wars 2 play for free. Lots of content and design changes were made to ensure the play for free version was hard to exploit. I find it really interesting there that he goes with the very standard like marketing term of play for free. It always makes me raise one eyebrow when I see ArenaNet went so hard to call it play for free, not free to play. No, there's negative connotations to free to play. We have to reverse the words. Anyway, yes, I guess that could become a real problem for bots, maybe? I don't know. I'm not sure whether it's really necessary for Guild Wars 1 either. Moving on. Small balance changes possible with the tools and resources left at your disposal. He says, I think it's physically possible to make skill change tweaks, but it takes enormous concentration to make non-breaking changes, so changes in this area are unlikely. Like, a lot of people are asking for balance changes in this AMA, and they do it very flippantly, but I think that the only things you can see happen to Guild Wars 1 are going to be small changes at this point, unless they make a radical decision as a company to support it more heavily. And, you know, balance changes just don't fall into that realm. They really don't. It would be so easy to make bad balance changes without sincere effort and intelligence behind them. Moving on, number 6, are you happy with the current state of Guild Wars 1? Is there anything you wish could be possible but isn't? And he says, I would fix the lag bug. So this comes up quite a lot in the AMA. There seems to be like some bug that has always existed with Guild Wars, but now that they're on the Amazon servers, it comes up a little bit more, and he's looking into fixing that. And finally, is there anything we as a community of gamers who genuinely love Guild Wars 1 can do to make new content / updates possible? And he says, good question, I don't know, but I'll ask around at work for ideas. Whether those ideas will manifest, I don't know. But the guy was obviously invigorated by this AMA because some of this did go through. Moving on, A. Schnellberg says, first of all, thanks so much for keeping this game alive and well. Would it be possible to take a look at the Guild Wars source code? Do you remember how long it took to develop the game before launch? How many people were working on this game at its peak? 3 very interesting questions, in my opinion. SDW says that the source is proprietary, so no, we don't let people see it. The game was developed from early 2000 until release in 2005. So a 5-year dev time, that's about the same as Guild Wars 2 had, by the way. And he says that max staff for Prophecies was about 60, and it went up to about 100 for the next 2 chapters. So that's actually more people than I thought, but there you have it. Moving on, Necron9 says, can you leak some Chronomancer and Summoner skills? What was their gameplay like? So this question's incredible, right? Because what it's actually asking for, what it's actually tapping into, is Utopia Design. If you guys don't know, it went Guild Wars Prophecies, Factions, Nightfall, and then it was supposed to be Utopia, but they had a change of heart and decided to go for Guild Wars 2. And Either North was created as a bridge between the two. So Utopia got cancelled. Utopia was going to have, just like all the other new campaigns, 2 new professions. And they were the Chronomancer and the Summoner. The Guild Wars 2 Chronomancer is sort of nodding back to this deleted thing from Utopia. So, Utopia is this fascinating thing. We have concept art of it, we have stray bits of information. A lot of Guild Wars 2-y things were repurposed from Utopia things. So, like the Destroyers, they were originally called the Tanakh, and they were going to be an enemy in Utopia. And kind of the Asuran architecture stuff is inspired by the fact that it was from Utopia, and it was going to be like a Mayan kind of campaign for Guild Wars 1. So, we have stray bits of information about Utopia, but there is like a whole world of things we could ask about this. But basically what I'm saying is there could be an AMA if you could find the devs, whoever was going to be the lead designer on Guild Wars 1 Utopia and remembers any of those old meetings, they could have a fascinating AMA where tons of different stuff was asked. But we obviously don't have that opportunity. We get SCW here, who simply says, I can't leak any of those skills. A designer might want to volunteer that. Come on, unknown designer out there. I know you're listening to this. Let's hear it. What's going on with Utopia? I'd love some of that trivia. That'd be so cool. What harm could it do? Let us hear it. But yeah, so no designer did volunteer in the end, but there you have it. Moving on, Pontiac in 1979 says, is there anyone at ArenaNet who focuses only on Guild Wars 1? I get that it's pretty unlikely, but I figured I'd ask anyway. And Cisco or Juniper. So here's what we're interested in. Joe and I are the principal maintainers, and we both have full-time jobs doing other things. This is what I mentioned at the start of the AMA. That said, ArenaNet is a pretty great place in that we are both able to dedicate time to Guild Wars when necessary. Most companies don't give the staff that kind of flexibility. That's why we have this new like LOD option that I talked about at the start of this video, and no comment on the networking gear there. So, yeah, it seems like there's freedom. All it takes is a dev with a bit of passion for it and to push a couple of little changes through. Kind of cool. T-Lock14 says, what is the likeliness of getting a graphics option in the client, and here it is, in the client to use LOD billboards? They look terrible on high-resolution screens, and there's no reason modern computers need the LODs anyway. He says, I love this idea. I'm more likely to do it with a command line if it really is that simple, so I don't have to worry about localizing UI. And he did. So that was 12 days ago, and it was about 3 days ago that the update went live. Pretty goddamn quick turnaround. And that means some of these other things he suggests that maybe might happen too. CFB Nerd says, hey SCW, thanks for being around here and talking to the users here. I had what I hope is a quick question for you that doesn't look like it's been explicitly asked already. If you have been to Camadan at all in the past few years, you've seen the numerous bots spamming their gold-selling websites where they sell Guild Wars items and cash for US dollars. Are there any plans to eradicate this once and for all, or is this here to stay in Guild Wars 1? And he says, a number of people have written to me privately on Reddit about this, and I think a couple of people wrote to Mike O'Brien about it also. We're discussing internally what to do. It's the once and for all part that's difficult. Cliff Spradlin, who used to work at ArenaNet, wrote a genius tool for finding spam, but is only implemented for Guild Wars 2. In my heart of hearts, I really believe that machine learning can fix this once and for all, but it's a very significant project. Short of that, we might have to schedule time to go in and ban the bots manually. Anyway, it's being discussed internally. You might remember a movie called The Matrix. I remember watching that and thinking, why do they have to go into the Matrix to fix the Matrix? Seems like once they're outside the Matrix, they could fix everything through clever programming. I've learned since then that sometimes the only way to fix a virtual world is to actually go into it. He gets a response, and so that's a fascinating insight at the end there. I wonder what I'm missing out on there to really understand that. But he says, it'd be nice if you could get a random employee, like a QA tester or community relations person, to dedicate an hour of a week to banning spammers. I bet the income gained from the botters buying new accounts would pay for itself. I love this perspective that there's such a thing as a random employee. You're disposable. You have no worthwhile task. Go. It's just this very weird perspective people get of how companies work from the outside. Anyway, he just responds again, and he says, we're discussing the botting issue internally. Moving on, Decunant Ice Cream says, what do you think Guild Wars 1 have been like if there was no searing? Everything green and beautiful throughout the whole of Tyria. Peaceful flute music everywhere. Birds chirping. What game do you think it could have been? I always hated the contrast of pre-searing and then going straight to that horrible, ugly ruins of Ascalon. The game just was never the same. I'll just note here that I personally loathe what this question commenter is asking and their perspective on the game. They seem to utterly fail to understand that the reason you love pre-searing so much is because you have that contrast. It's an insane comment for me to read. Anyway, SCW says, originally I'm told the game was all searing and no pre-searing. Pre-searing was added at the last minute. I think it's so cool that people still hang out there. And yeah, he's right. This is actually an anecdote I was aware of before, but I wanted to throw it in here as a reminder to many people who don't know this. Pre-searing was added like right at the last minute, and it's actually one of the best experiences in Guild Wars 1 in a funny way, in its own little pocket universe. So yeah, fun stuff. And a nice little reminder of the fact that that was added very late. Next, we get this question here. It was in a massive wall of text. This is the only bit I'm interested in that wasn't a repeat of other stuff or didn't get a good answer. So the commenter says, there are, or have been, additional music pieces available for Guild Wars on Direct Song. It's configurable where you want to play which pieces at which volume. The required region codes are not officially documented though. Do you know a way to acquire and share some additional info to ease the personal configuration of the music streamed in-game? A chunk of info has been given to the players, see here, but it's mostly still left for us to figure things out with trial and with error. With internal region names deviating from the names in-game, such as Eden for pre-searing Ascalon, it's unlikely to achieve much that way, I fear. So this is a side of the story I never knew. So Direct Song, yes, there are some bonus tracks. And there was kind of a fiddly website where you could get those tracks and put them into the game somehow. I never really used it very much, but I remember if you got the Nightfall Collector's Edition, I think you got some bonus tracks there as well. Well, SCW actually worked on the original Direct Song website that now is long gone. And I know Direct Song has a bit of a reputation at the moment, right? But he worked on the original, and so he's a good person to ask this question. He says, Direct Song does, maybe, I'll have to see what's publishable. So this whole like side of people have never known exactly where and when certain tracks are supposed to play, maybe if he gets around to that, we will finally know. And that will be pretty good for the diehards out there. I think that's an interesting bit of trivia and fun thing to hook up. Another thing, you can now do your new Guild Wars 1 playthrough with the new graphics and new bonus tracks playing at the right place at the right volume. Moving on, we also have another question. I know this request is probably a long shot, and I hate to be known as that guy, but is there any way that Guild Wars players can switch the login screen? Oh, this was one of my favorite questions, guys. Check this out. Can switch the login screen theme between Factions, Nightfall, and Eye of the North themes. Like everything else in the game, these looked amazing. All right, I've got to back up for a second. Many of you guys won't know this, but when you log into Guild Wars 1 today, you get this. I'll show you it on screen, right? This mountainscape as it swells off in the background. This is the Eye of the North expansion theme. You know how when Path of Fire came out, they changed the login screen? You know how when Heart of Thorns came out, they changed the login screen for Guild Wars 2? Same happened for Guild Wars 1 as well. The thing is, if you look at the timeline of Guild Wars 1, it was like you had Prophecies release, and then about a year later, very quickly later, we had Factions. Then 6 months later, we had Nightfall, and soon after that, Eye of the North as well. So what actually has happened is for the vast majority of Guild Wars 1's existence, it's been this Eye of the North screen with the mountains. But there were different login screens, different character selects. There was the Factions one, there was the Nightfall one, and so on. Even the Prophecies one, which is super old, by the way, had a totally different format, whereas a bunch of guys kneeling down by a campfire, and you clicked your character, they would stand up and walk towards the screen. It was amazing, right? And then that changed with Factions. But those character selects are old, so old that they're really hard to find a good, high-quality one on YouTube. I certainly wasn't making consistent videos on YouTube at the time that these were active, and so there are a couple of people who documented the old ones, but because there's no way to get them back, there's no actual, like, decent 1080p reasonable frame rate versions of these that are anything worthwhile. So, if we could get those back, that would be mind-blowing. And that's a great question to ask, and they say it's a long shot, but SCW responds, and he says, in response to this, that the login screen art is hardwired. To make it switchable would require ensuring all of the art assets still exist in a downloadable form. Then, since I don't want to do localization or UI work, I would add a command line option to pick one. So just like with this LOD full thing, you would pick factions login, and boom, it would be the factions one when you turn it on. I really hope that that's still downloadable. I really hope that if he does do some hunting in this, that this is eventually possible. That would be such a cool update to Guild Wars 1. It would be amazing. They could even time it perfectly so that just as the bots come back to GW1, they do another update and break everything again, but give us those old login screens. I would adore that. I would give you guys like 1440p, 60 frame video. Oh, it'd be so good. And you got the old art on it as well. A real nostalgia bomb. But hey, who knows? Maybe I'm getting my hopes up. And that's probably the thing that excited me more than anything else on the AMA. And there you go, guys. That's really the majority of the interesting things to me. There are a lot of other things, repeat comments and questions that he answers a hell of a lot. There was a response, like I say, from Mike Z in there. If you guys want to check that out, there is a link in the description. Oh, I almost forgot as well. I want to finish this video off. SCW himself actually provided me with some footage, some flyby footage he made just this last week, showing off the difference between the LOD billboard option on and off, and you can see that in the background here. So, I mean, 3 cheers for this guy. He really went above and beyond, and you're looking at his demonstration of it in action right now. So, really, really, really badass, and thanks very much. And there you go, a bit of news from Guild Wars 1. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you for more good stuff whenever they do more updates. And obviously on the Guild Wars 2 side. Cheers, everyone. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you shortly.